two children, one forest, 14 years apart, and both vanish without a trace. What dark secrets lie buried in the woods of the Van Laar estate? Welcome to BookVerse, the place where stories come alive. Today we dive into The God of the Woods, a haunting mystery by Liz Moore, where privilege hides pain, and the silence of the forest speaks louder than words. It was a quiet summer night in the Adirondack Mountains. The trees stood still under the moonlight, and the lake beside Emerson Camp shimmered like glass. Everything seemed normal, peaceful. But by morning that peace would be shattered. Barbara Van Laar was just 13 years old, the youngest daughter of the powerful and wealthy Van Laar family. Her parents owned Emerson Camp, a prestigious retreat hidden deep in the woods, a place where the elite sent their children for long, luxurious summers. But on that night in August 1975, Barbara vanished. She was last seen by the other girls in her cabin, laughing quietly beneath her blanket, flashlight in hand. At lights out, everything seemed fine. But when the morning bell rang, Barbara's bed was still made, untouched. Her shoes were gone. And so was she. No note, no scream, no sign of a struggle, just silence. The camp counselors were the first to notice. They searched the bathroom, the mess hall, the trails leading down to the lake. But Barbara had disappeared into thin air. Panic spread quickly, from campers to counselors to the staff, and finally to her parents. Her mother, Ingrid Van Laar, arrived almost instantly, calm on the outside, but clearly unraveling inside. Her father, Peter Van Laar III, kept his distance, cold, quiet, unreadable. Together they stood as pillars of composure, refusing to believe that anything could happen to their daughter in their camp. But this was not just any camper. This was Barbara Van Laar, and her disappearance was a headline waiting to explode. The local police were called, but it was clear from the beginning, this case would be handled differently. The Van Laars were not ordinary people. Their name carried weight, and their secrets ran deep. Within hours, search dogs were brought in. Helicopters hovered over the treetop. Volunteers formed lines and marched into the woods, calling her name over and over again. Barbara! Barbara! But the forest answered with silence. And for those who remembered, the silence was hauntingly familiar. Because 14 years earlier, in the very same woods, Barbara's older brother had vanished too. Peter Van Laar IV. They called him Bear. He had gone into the trees one summer afternoon, and never came back. His body was never found. His case was never solved. And now, history was repeating itself. The counselors whispered. The staff traded theories behind closed doors. But no one dared speak too loudly. Not around the Van Laars. Not around Ingrid. Especially not around Peter, who stared into the trees with a look that said he knew more than he ever let on. Some said Barbara ran away. Others believed she had been taken. But the truth was, nobody knew. Not yet. The only thing certain was this: a girl was gone. A family was breaking. And the woods were watching. As night fell again over Emerson Camp, the trees stood tall and still, as if hiding something deep in their roots. Something old. Something dark. Something that had waited 14 long years. This was no ordinary disappearance. This was the beginning of a mystery that would tear open everything the Van Laar family tried to bury. And Barbara? She was no ordinary girl. The forest was alive with whispers. Every twig snap sounded louder now. Every shadow felt longer. As search teams continued calling Barbara's name, something darker began to stir beneath the surface, something that had been buried for a very long time. 14 years before Barbara Van Laar disappeared, her older brother vanished too. His name was Peter Van Laar IV, but everyone called him Bear. He was only 9 years old when he wandered into those woods, and never came back. No body, no blood, no clues. Just a boy gone, swallowed by the very forest that now held his sister. Back then, the Van Laars had insisted it was a tragic accident. Maybe Bear drowned. Maybe he got lost. The story was clean, quiet, and quickly closed. But those who worked at the estate, the cooks, the caretakers, the counselors, they remembered the way Ingrid screamed when he vanished. They remembered the hushed voices, the way the police were told to back OFF, and the way everything just went back to normal. Until now, Barbara's disappearance did more than open a new case. It reopened an old wound. And the parallels were impossible to ignore. 2 Van Laar children, 1 forest, 14 years apart. Same family, same mystery. Detective Laurel, the woman assigned to the case, knew something was off. She had seen kidnappings before, even runaways. But this was different. The Van Laars gave her full access. They offered polite cooperation, but behind their perfect smiles there was tension and fear. She noticed how Ingrid clutched the family heirloom locket around her neck, as if it held something more than gold. She watched how Peter barely spoke, his face stiff, his answers robotic. And then there were the servants, quiet, cautious, loyal. Too loyal. Laurel began her investigation at Emerson Camp. She interviewed every counselor, every staff member. Some were helpful, most were not, but a few said just enough to raise alarms. One counselor, a girl named Rachel, mentioned Barbara's behavior had changed weeks before her disappearance. She had grown distant, nervous, secretive, like she was hiding something or running from something. Another staff member recalled hearing Barbara argue with someone late at night, but they never saw who it was. And then came the most chilling piece of information so far, from a groundskeeper. He remembered Barbara standing alone by the edge of the woods, just days before she vanished. She was staring into the trees, whispering to herself. When he asked her if she was okay, she said something strange. She said, "I think the forest remembers what happened to Bear." Those words stuck with him. They sent chills down his spine. Now they haunted Laurel too. What did happen to Bear? Why had no one ever spoken about it again? And most importantly, could the 2 disappearances be connected? The deeper Laurel dug, the more tangled the web became. Old newspaper articles were missing. Police records had been edited. Timelines did not match. There were gaps, intentional ones. And the Van Laars? They had built their lives around those gaps. They had created a world so polished, so perfect. No one dared ask what it was hiding. But that world was cracking now, because Barbara was gone, and Bear had never really left. He was still there, in the trees, in the shadows, in the story that was never finished. Detective Laurel knew this was more than just a mystery. It was a family curse, a legacy of secret. And the forest? The forest had seen everything. Back at the Van Laar estate, the house felt heavier than usual. Its massive windows reflected the endless forest outside, like eyes that refused to blink. Inside, silence ruled. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that screams beneath the surface. Barbara was still missing. But it was not just the search that weighed on everyone. It was the past. And in this house, the past never stayed buried. Ingrid Van Laar walked the hallways like a ghost in pearls. Her heels tapped across the marble floors, but she barely made a sound. She smiled at the maids. She offered tea to the detectives. But behind her eyes there was something dark, something fragile. She had lost 2 children to these woods, and yet she never cried. Meanwhile, Peter Van Laar III locked himself in his study, a tall, cold man with perfect posture and hollow eyes. He rarely spoke. When he did, his voice was even, controlled, as if emotion was a weakness. He told Detective Laurel everything she needed to hear, but nothing she needed to know. The more Laurel questioned them, the more she realized this was not just grief. This was something older, something rotten, something that had festered in this family for years. And then she discovered the box. It was hidden in the attic, tucked behind old trunks and forgotten paintings. Inside were photos, faded and torn, of young Bear, smiling, playing, fishing by the lake. But there was one photo that made her pause. It was Bear, standing near the edge of the wood, holding hands with someone. Another boy, unfamiliar, unsmiling. The face was scratched out, deeply, violently. Laurel took the photo downstairs. "Who is this with Bear?" she asked Ingrid, holding the image. Ingrid froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Then Peter walked in. He looked at the photo, and for the first time his face changed. His eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched. "That photo should not exist," he said coldly. "It was supposed to be destroyed." Laurel knew she had touched a nerve, a deep one. She pressed further. "Who is the other boy?" Peter stared at her. "Just a summer friend," he said. "Someone who stayed too long." Then he left the room. Ingrid looked down, twisting the ring on her finger. Her voice trembled. "There are things we do not talk about, detective. Not in this house. Not in these woods." Laurel had heard enough. The Van Laars were not just protecting their daughter's reputation. They were protecting something bigger, something older, and maybe something dangerous. That night, Laurel took the photo back to her hotel room. She scanned it carefully under a magnifying glass. Around Bear's neck, she saw something strange, a small wooden carving on a string. A symbol. It looked like a tree with eyes carved into it. That same symbol had been found earlier, etched into a tree trunk behind cabin 4, where Barbara had slept. Coincidence? Or a connection? As Laurel pieced things together, she began to feel something creeping up her spine, a quiet fear. This was not just about a missing girl. This was about a family that had been touched by something they refused to name. A family bound by secret and silence. The Van Laars were unraveling. Slowly, carefully, quietly. But the forest? The forest remembered everything, and it was beginning to speak. The woods behind Emerson Camp were no longer a place of adventure. They were a maze of memories, thick, dark, and watching. Detective Laurel stood beneath a crooked pine tree, staring at a strange carving on the bark. It was the same symbol she had seen in the photo around Bear's neck, a tree with eyes carved into it. Not just a symbol, a sign. Someone or something had marked these woods, and the mark was older than Barbara, older than Bear, maybe even older than the camp itself. That night, Laurel met with Rachel again, the counselor who had sensed something was off about Barbara before she vanished. Under the cold porch light, Rachel confessed what she had kept hidden. Barbara was scared, she said. Not of something, but of someone. Laurel's heart raced. She said her dreams were changing, that someone was whispering her name at night from the trees. She said she felt like her brother was still here. Laurel blinked. Her brother. Rachel nodded slowly. She believed Bear never left, that he was watching her, protecting her, or maybe warning her. It was too much to ignore. Laurel headed back to the forest, this time alone. She retraced Barbara's last known step, past the edge of the lake, beyond the fire pit, into the trees where sunlight vanished. And then she found it. A clearing, hidden by thick brush wrapped in silence. At the center, a small, rotting cabin. Abandoned, forgotten, or so it seemed. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Torn blankets, empty cans, an old rusted lantern, and carved into every wooden wall, the same symbol again and again. Laurel's breath caught. Her flashlight flickered, and just as she turned to leave, she saw it. A name, scratched into the wooden floorboards. Barbara. Right below it in smaller, older letters. Bear. Laurel stepped back. This place, this hidden cabin, had seen them both. Suddenly, the air grew colder. The wind howled through the trees like a low growl. She left the cabin fast, but not before she noticed something else outside. Footprints. Fresh ones. Someone had been there. Recently. Back at the estate, Ingrid was unraveling. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her pearls. Peter had locked himself in the study again, refusing to speak. But Laurel had reached her limit. "You are hiding something," she said, her voice sharp. Peter turned slowly. "We are protecting something," he whispered. Then, he said something she did not expect. "Do not go back to the cabin." Laurel froze. "How do you know about the cabin?" Peter said nothing. That silence was louder than any scream. Ingrid stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. "It started with Bear," she whispered. "But it did not end with him." Suddenly, the story was no longer about a missing girl. It was about the Van Laars, about the land they owned, the blood that had soaked into the roots of those trees, the price they had paid to build their legacy here, and the curse they had never escaped. Laurel left the mansion shaken. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was not what she expected. A boy vanishes. A girl disappears years later. A cabin marked with names and symbols. A family desperate to stay silent. This was no longer a simple case. This was a story the forest had been writing for decades. And Barbara? Barbara was part of the final chapter. The town of North Shore was beginning to stir. Whispers moved through the diner booths, the gas station, the post office. They spoke of Barbara Van Laar, the girl from the estate, gone without a trace. The locals remembered what happened before. They remembered Bear. And just like that, the past was crawling back. Detective Laurel now lived inside the case. She barely slept. Her mind played every moment on repeat. The photo, the cabin, the symbols, the name. Barbara, written into the floor of a place no child should have ever found. She returned to the woods. Again. This time, she was not looking for clues. She was looking for truth. As she stepped deeper into the forest, the sounds of the town faded behind her. The trees grew taller, the air thicker, The kind of silence that wraps around your ears and listens. She reached the cabin. Everything was the same, except the door was open. Laurel entered cautiously. The carvings were still there. The dust. The smell of mold and memory. But something was different now. On the table, a book. Small. Leather-bound. New. She picked it up. Inside, the pages were blank, except one. A sentence. Handwritten. I am not lost. I am free. It was Barbara's handwriting. Laurel's heart pounded. She turned the book over. Taped to the back cover, a photograph. It was Barbara. Older. Pale. Her eyes wide and alive, but also distant. She was standing near the same crooked pine tree Laurel had passed on her way in. She had been here. Laurel felt a sharp rustle behind her. She spun around. But nothing. Just wind. Leaves. Shadows. The feeling returned, like the forest was watching. She hurried back to town. This was not just about trauma or grief. This was spiritual. This place, these woods, they held people. Took them in. Changed them. At the Van Laar estate, Peter and Ingrid were waiting. This time, Laurel did not ask questions. She made a demand. Tell me what happened to Bear. Peter finally broke. His voice was low. Heavy. Defeated. Bear was not taken, he said. He left. Ingrid whispered through her tears. He heard them calling him. Laurel asked, Who? Peter looked out the window into the black trees beyond the estate. The god of the woods. Ingrid added, It is not a myth. It is not a game. This forest, it has rules. They explained everything, or what little they understood. It started when Bear was young. He would vanish for hours, only to return with strange marks on his arms. He spoke of the Whispering Man and the Guardian Trees. At first, they thought it was his imagination, until one night he did not return. And in his place, that symbol etched into the back door of the mansion. The Van Laars never told the police the full truth, because the truth sounded like madness. And now, Barbara had followed the same path. Laurel left that night with 100 new questions. But one thing was clear. Barbara was not kidnapped. She had gone willingly, or had been called. Back in her hotel room, Laurel opened the leather-bound journal again. She read the sentence once more. I am not lost. I am free. She closed her eyes. Outside, the wind picked up, and in the distance, just beyond her window, a line of trees swayed in unison, as if something was moving through them, something old, something sacred, something waiting. And the case of Barbara Van Laar? It was no longer a disappearance. It was a transformation. The forest stood still, as if it had told its story, and was waiting for silence to take hold once again. Detective Laurel sat alone in her car at the edge of the woods. The case was technically closed. The headlines said, Van Laar girl presumed dead. But Laurel knew better. She had seen the photo. She had read the message in Barbara's journal. I am not lost. I am free. This was not just a runaway. It was a return. A surrender to something ancient. Something older than the Van Laars, older than North Shore itself. Something that lived within the woods, and waited for those who could hear it. Back at Emerson Camp, summer had come again. Children laughed in the daylight, hiked the same trails, swam in the same lake. But no one went beyond the pine line anymore. Not since Barbara. Not since the stories returned. Rachel, the counselor, left the camp after that. She said she could not walk those grounds without feeling like someone was following her, watching from between the trees. At the Van Laar estate, the windows remained shut, the gardens overgrown. Ingrid rarely left her room. Peter barely spoke. Their family names still carried weight in town, but inside those halls they were shadows, haunting their own home, because they knew. They knew what the god of the woods had taken from them, and they knew it was not finished. One afternoon Laurel returned to the cabin. She found new carvings on the walls, fresh ones. They were not names this time. They were warnings, symbols, prayers. But one thing stood out, a message scratched into the wood right beneath the window. "I see you." Laurel stared at it for a long time. She placed her hand on the wall, feeling the indent of the letters. Whoever wrote it had done so with shaking hands. Fear maybe, or something deeper, a knowing. She stepped outside and looked up at the trees. They swayed gently as if breathing. She thought of Bear, the boy who vanished, of Barbara, the girl who followed, of the forest that took and gave and whispered, and she thought of the question that would never leave her. Why them? Why the Van Laars? Was it the land they stole? The blood they buried? The secrets they kept? Or were Barbara and Bear not victims, but chosen? Laurel would never know. Some stories are not meant to be solved. Some stories live in the root, in the bark, in the wind. And the god of the woods? He never speaks, but he always watches. So if you ever find yourself near the pine line, deep in the forests of the north, listen closely. Because the trees remember, and the woods never forget. Thank you for watching BookVerse, the place where stories come alive. If you enjoyed this chilling recap of The God of the Woods by Liz Moore, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell for more haunting stories and unforgettable mysteries. Until next time, stay curious. And if you hear whispering in the trees, do not look back.